So, of course, we're starting with the major news that special counsel Robert Mueller has provided his report to Donald Trump's Attorney General William Barr. We're finally going to see exactly what's in Mueller's report, except we're not. All we have is an initial summary, 4 pages, written by Donald Trump's Attorney General William Barr, who wrote a memo last year saying he doesn't believe a president can be indicted for obstruction of justice regardless of what the evidence says. He has put together a 4 page summary as he sees it. Mueller submitted his report on Friday. Barr released a 4 page summary yesterday on Sunday. And I've read dozens of articles and analyses, many of which are missing key factual data in terms of what we know and what we don't know. Many of the analyses, either with sort of irrelevant, incomplete, or straw man analyses of the situation. So I'm going to make an effort to provide something of value here that will have two goals: reduce confusion and increase general understanding of what it is that is going on. And my prediction is nobody will be pleased with my analysis and assessment here, just based on the tweets I've been getting over the last 24 hours. So let's set this up. As I have been saying for more than a year now, if Democrats want a shot in 2020, they can't be relying on a Mueller report that is going to lead to Donald Trump's impeachment or indictment or removal, because it's an outrageous standard and it's a very unlikely expectation. And in fact, anyone who's been waiting around for sort of smoking gun video evidence of Donald Trump colluding with Russia, that was a crazy expectation to begin with. And it's something I've been arguing about a lot with callers on both the right and left on the show for the last year. That's just not a reasonable expectation. It's not a good political strategy. It's unlikely to ever come to fruition. And indeed, that appears to have been confirmed by Robert Mueller so far, although, of course, we need the full report. Everything we know right now is based on a 4 page summary done by William Barr, Trump's Attorney General, who was handpicked specifically to mitigate the damage of the Mueller investigation. This is a sanitized interpretation of the Mueller report, written by the guy who said a year ago you can't indict a president for obstruction of justice. Many people believe that we now know the full extent of the Mueller report. We don't. All we have is a 4 page summary from Trump's Attorney General, William Barr. The interesting thing to consider is that imagine for a moment that since the start of this investigation, we saw nothing. The investigation was carried out in silence, and there were no indictments all along. There were no convictions all along. There were no jail and prison sentences all along. Restitution to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. If on Friday, Robert Mueller had announced, my investigation is now complete, we are indicting 37 people, or whatever the number is. Here are the ones who have already pled guilty. Here are the ones where we already have guilty verdicts. Here is the amount of money that they are going to be subject to in terms of penalties and repayments for fraud and other financial crimes. And here's the number of years cumulatively that they are going to be spending in prison. Immediately, the reaction would be, that is a stunning and overwhelming result. The number of indictments, the number of years of prison time, the amount of information that has been gathered. But because over time we had one indictment and another indictment and a guilty plea, etc., when Robert Mueller says this is as far as I go, I understand that it seems extraordinarily anticlimactic, but there's still a lot of important stuff to be gathered, even from what William Barr has released so far. Number one, the special counsel has referred several matters to other offices for further action. This confirms that the SDNY and a number of other investigations are going to continue, and there may be future indictments there. Are they going to be for Trump colluding with Putin in the cartoonish way that some were hoping for from the beginning? Of course not. Of course not. That was never a realistic expectation. Number two, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference. Exactly as expected. We did not believe that Trump was going to be caught red-handed. Interestingly, imagine any Democrat getting an email from Russians saying, we'll help your dad win. And then the son of the candidate says they love it. And then they have the meeting and then the Russians help, and then your campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, gives polling data to Russia, and your hand-picked attorney general says, there's nothing to see here. But we'll put that aside for now, because in the end, it is the sort of conclusion that we expected. Trump was never going to be caught red-handed colluding with Putin personally. Unable to exonerate Trump from obstruction of justice is another interesting element of the report. The report says that Robert Mueller evaluated evidence when it comes to obstruction, cannot say that the president definitively obstructed justice, but also cannot exonerate the president from having obstructed justice. That's important, and it is being left up to Donald Trump's Attorney General William Barr to determine if obstruction of justice took place. I wonder what William Barr's opinion will be as to whether Donald Trump obstructed justice. And this is where you realize that Donald Trump's appointment of William Barr is working exactly as designed. Barr was partially selected because it was known that he doesn't think a president can be indicted for obstruction. Barr wrote a memo more than a year ago saying he doesn't believe you can indict a president for obstruction of justice. And now William Barr is in the position of deciding, based on the evidence, does he think charges of obstruction of justice are warranted for the president? I can let you know right now, it's not happening. It is simply not happening. And any Democrat who now is going to sort of hang their hat on, well, we need to make sure William Barr decides to indict or prosecute or whatever for obstruction, it's just not happening. The guy said a year ago that he just doesn't think a president can be indicted for that. It's just not going to happen. Very interesting element from William Barr's report that's not getting a lot of attention is that it confirms that indeed it was Russians who hacked the Clinton campaign and the DNC. This was a primary assertion that many on the right denied all along. They said, no, it wasn't really the Russians who hacked the DNC. And the report from Barr summarizing Mueller's report also says that the Russian hacks of DNC and Clinton material were disseminated by Wikileaks. Remember that there were huge contingents on the right and left which were saying there is no evidence whatsoever that WikiLeaks was connected to the Russian hacks. If you accept William Barr's claims about collusion, don't you also have to accept William Barr's claims about WikiLeaks' connection to Russia? If not, you're being extraordinarily inconsistent. That's not been discussed in any significant way since yesterday's 4-page release from William Barr. So there's a common refrain from the right, which is, see, Trump wasn't actively working with Russia. I want to know who was saying Trump will be caught red-handed having worked with Russia. I can't actually think of anyone who was saying that, certainly not on this program. We have insisted that Donald Trump, through sort of being a guy who wants to be liked by everybody and through previous financial issues, has been sort of lulled into this situation of indifference to people in his campaign taking help from Russia and indifference to Russia actively working to help him defeat Hillary Clinton. But the defense that, see, Trump didn't do it is not really refuting anything that serious people were saying about this. I also want to mention that there hasn't been any serious reporting on this summary, which addresses sort of one of the major issues, which is what even was and was not investigated here. Because the report, if you believe Barr's summary, focuses the investigation only on very specific questions about Trump, quote, collusion, when we know that this is all so much bigger than that. And on that, I think the left is basically united. From what I've been seeing in the last 24 hours, the left-wing commentators seem basically united on the idea that this doesn't mean, nor did anyone say, Trump has committed no crimes, but that the specific collusion caught red-handed expectation for people who had that was maybe misguided or simply inaccurate. So the next step is the full report has to be made public, period. The word of Donald Trump's attorney general, who was picked because, at least in part, he doesn't think a president can be indicted for obstruction, that can't be allowed to stand as the official record of what is and isn't in the report. If there's nothing damaging in the report, Trump, who now feels vindicated and exonerated, should want the report released. My guess is he'll fight it because the full report probably does contain a bunch of damaging details that simply don't rise to the level of enough evidence to indict Donald Trump on this issue of collusion. Again, the report doesn't rule out obstruction of justice. It does put it in the hands of Donald Trump's attorney general. I imagine that there are specifics in the full report related to that. Another sort of point of perspective here that I want to add is that anybody who's calling this an exoneration or a vindication seems to be either deliberately or inadvertently missing or not understanding what's being said. This is a 4-page summary which actually says Trump has not been exonerated on the issue of obstruction. But the real message is, if you're hoping he gets charged with obstruction in order to remove him from office in 2020, I've been telling you for more than a year now, I wouldn't be holding my breath. And if we can take sort of like a positive perspective on this, hopefully this helps the left by confirming that the Mueller probe was never going to be a get out of jail free card, or a put Trump in jail free card, I guess maybe better said. Voting in November of 2020 is going to be the way to remove Donald Trump. And now we have to make sure that everybody understands that. Last thing on this, I want to just briefly address the portion of the left that sees this as vindicating Trump. And it's not a huge portion. Again, most people on the left understand collusion red-handed was not likely, but Trump has done a lot of things wrong, including money laundering and other crimes. It is a little strange to see some so-called leftists who normally recognize that our justice system is hugely biased along privilege and racial and class lines, accept that a 72-year-old billionaire president didn't actually do anything because his hand-picked attorney general sort of said so in a 4-page summary. And what I mean by that is, when the justice system tells us that some black guy was selling pot and it was dangerous and we've got to put him in jail, we understand that that's the message that comes from a system that is inherently biased. And we recognize that just because law enforcement says something doesn't make it true. You can't believe that and at the same time eagerly accept the summary of William Barr as an accurate representation of reality, as a total representation of reality. And along those same lines, when Trump's Secretary of State tells us ISIS is defeated, we realize that's a political statement. We should be skeptical of that. When Trump's Secretary of Education tells us Trump is winning on education, we recognize that she's a biased political actor. So in the same way, when Trump's own attorney general comes in and says Trump is cleared based on my selective summary of Robert Mueller's report, why aren't we skeptical about accepting that as fact as well? That element really doesn't make sense to me. So listen, I've agreed all along that it's the cover-up, it's the obstruction, it's the ancillary and tangential crimes. That's really the focus. Trump was not going to be caught red-handed colluding with Putin. That's not actually news. And the fact that anyone on the left or right sees that as vindication suggests to me they're not fully understanding the details of this initial summary of the report. And please, don't forget that until we see the actual report, all we have is a political document from a guy who said from day one, before day one, from last year, I don't believe you can indict a president for obstruction of justice. I look forward to hearing from you. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. One of today's sponsors is Minds.com, a social networking platform that is committed to free speech, transparency, privacy, and fairly compensating content creators. It basically combines many of the features of sites like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter in one platform. But Minds is trying to solve a lot of the problems that exist on major social networks. On Minds, you're not being spied on. You're not being tracked. Everything is encrypted and private. Minds as a company can't even see any of your personal data. You're not going to see a bunch of creepy ads showing you the same products you were just looking at on other websites. And unlike other major social networks, the code that runs Minds.com is publicly available. It provides total transparency and the ability for developers to even contribute to the project themselves. For example, on many other social platforms, you're only reaching a tiny fraction of your followers organically. But on Minds, the news feed is 100% organic, and you can see for yourself how the algorithms actually work. Every time you do something on Minds, like create content, share, like someone else's content, you earn Minds tokens, which can be used to boost the visibility of your own content. You are getting rewarded for participating in and contributing to the network. And Minds offers a feature kind of like Patreon, where your fans can unlock your premium content by sending you Minds tokens. I encourage you to go check it out at minds.com. There's also a mobile app, and you can actually follow the David Pakman Show on Minds at minds.com/David Pakman Show. I've also put a link right underneath this video.